And welcome into the Carolina Journal News Hour, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good Wednesday morning to you. We start off the program this morning with some major breaking news across the state of North Carolina. It's a story that we have been chatting about for a couple of weeks now as we continue to look at the high-stakes race for the North Carolina Supreme Court. To get additional details on that this morning, it's my pleasure to welcome Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation with those latest details this morning. Mitch, appreciate the time. We've covered the updates over the last couple of weeks, and we've got new news this morning as now the state court, the North Carolina Supreme Court, is involved in this race between Jefferson Griffin and Allison Riggs. What are you learning?
Yeah, the state Supreme Court, which is the court to which both Allison Riggs and Jefferson Griffin want to serve based on the recent election, that court has stepped into the race and said that there is going to be a temporary stay blocking the State Board of Elections from certifying the election result in this case. Without a court order, the plans were for the State Board of Elections to vote on Friday to certify Allison Riggs as the winner. We all know that based on the latest count, she is 734 votes ahead of Jefferson Griffin. But Griffin continues to challenge more than 60,000 ballots cast statewide for a number of reasons that we could get into if you'd like. But Griffin is saying, hey, if I don't have a court order that allows me to continue this challenge until it plays itself out through the court process, my election protest and challenge will be mooted, because once Allison Riggs is certified as the winner, there's nothing else for me to do legally. My case will be moot. So the state Supreme Court, with a 5-1 vote, decided to put a temporary stay in this case. The one dissenter was the Democratic Justice Anita Earls. Allison Riggs certainly would have dissented, but she couldn't have voted. She was recused in this case. The 5 Republican justices all voted for that stay, and they put forward what they're calling an expedited schedule to get this addressed. The Republican candidate in the race, Jefferson Griffin, the one who is involved in the challenges, he's going to be able to file his arguments next week. And then the State Board of Elections will have another week for its response. And then there will be a few more days for Griffin to respond to what the State Board of Elections says, which means by late January, all of the paperwork will be done and the state Supreme Court can issue its ruling. Now, the important thing to note on this isn't the only piece of the legal puzzle going on with this. This case had been sitting in a federal courtroom before U.S. Chief District Judge Richard Myers decided to send the case back from federal court to state court where it was originally filed. Now, right after that order, not only did Griffin ask for the state Supreme Court to act, but the State Board of Elections appealed the ruling to the 4th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. The 4th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals has the case on its books, but at this point has said nothing about trying to step in and stop the state Supreme Court from issuing its stay. But that's certainly something that the people against Jefferson Griffin could ask for. So this is far from done. But at this point, where things stand is that no vote for election certification on Friday, and that the competing sides in this case will have a couple of weeks or more to make legal arguments before the state Supreme Court decides to do anything else, or if it allows Allison Riggs to move forward as the winner.
Looking back at kind of the timeline on this, we heard from Myers late on Monday that this was an issue that he did not believe, in his opinion, laid within the jurisdiction of a federal court. He claimed that even though it's the Help Voters Register Act, HAVA, that's in question, that there is state law in the book that mirrors that, and seemed to indicate that this was merely a state issue that needed to be dealt with in state courts. So I guess this appeals process through the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals could maybe bring those questions back to the federal level and say, well, maybe you do need to look at that. Is that kind of the process here?
That's exactly what the State Board of Elections and Allison Riggs and some activist groups working with the Democratic operative Mark Elias want. The reason that they moved the case, the State Board of Elections moved the case from state court to federal court, is they said, hey, this is a federal court issue. Regardless of what state law says, all of this depends on the Federal Help America Vote Act passed in 2002. One of the other things we've covered in this case is that as this case was still in federal court, some old-time Democratic big congressional leaders, Tom Daschle and Richard Gephardt, filed a brief supporting the State Board of Elections and supporting by extension Allison Riggs in this case, saying, look, this is supposed to be something that a federal court deals with, not something that's left on a state-by-state basis. Richard Myers, the chief district judge in the Eastern District of North Carolina, disagreed. He said you could, on the federal level, deal with this issue, but this is based on state law, and it would be bad for a federal judge to come in and decide some issues that are contested in state law and that should be left to the state courts. That's why he decided shortly after he considered all of the arguments to send the case back to the state Supreme Court. But the other folks involved in this case, the State Board of Elections, Allison Riggs, and also the groups working with Mark Elias, all think that this should be handled by a federal court. That's why they want the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals to order Myers to take another look and actually render a decision.
Mitch, I think it would be disingenuous for me not to bring up the political makeup of the state's highest court. It is currently 5-2 Republicans to Democrats, 5-1 if Riggs has to recuse herself from any of these ongoing legal challenges. How relevant do you think that is as we watch this play out over the next couple of weeks and into the middle and latter parts of the month of January?
Well, certainly it's going to play a role, at least in perception. I mean, already we have seen that the order that was issued was 5-1. The 5 Republicans were in favor of issuing the temporary stay. The one dissenter was the Democrat, Anita Earls. Allison Riggs couldn't vote. She was recused because this directly affects her and her seat on the court. And as this moves forward, if there's a 5-1 ruling on this with the 5 Republicans on one side and Anita Earls on the other side, everyone who looks at this is going to say there at least has to be some sort of role of politics in there, even if it ends up being a legal issue that's dividing justices philosophically, because of the fact that we have 5 Republican justices, 2 Democratic justices, and because in this legal case, you have Republicans on one side and Democrats on the other side. Both sides are going to look at this, and if they lose the ruling, they're going to say it's to deal with politics.
Mitch, I want to talk about some of those specific issues here that Jefferson Griffin is bringing forward. We'll discuss that coming up after the break. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:12, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time to get a look at traffic on this Wednesday morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. We're looking great.
Huh? It's 5:18. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. We've got some news out of Washington, D.C. this morning in relation to hurricane relief. Yesterday, North Carolina Republican Senator Thom Tillis announced a $1.65 billion in a community development block grant for disaster recovery. He announced that those funds have been secured to help rebuild communities devastated by the hurricane. The funding comes directly from a bipartisan $100 billion supplemental disaster bill that was passed on December the 21st, which he also worked with congressional colleagues to pass. Tillis also secured several key provisions in the legislation, including mandates to deliver federal assistance to Western North Carolina. In a press release yesterday from Tillis, he says the initial grant for communities devastated by Hurricane Helene is a crucial step in the long journey towards recovery for Western North Carolina. I am proud to have worked alongside my colleagues to bring this essential aid to those who need it most. These funds, which are part of this $100 billion disaster supplemental bill, will deliver critical relief to the hardest hit areas as we continue our efforts to restore and rebuild Western North Carolina. He continued by saying that it is imperative that North Carolina Democrat Governor Josh Stein, as well as the Republican-led General Assembly, work to replace the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency. He said a debacle of an agency that mismanaged billions of federal dollars for Matthew and Florence recovery and left thousands of North Carolinians without homes. We have to get it right. Now, we've already heard from the new governor in Josh Stein on his first day in office, his first full day in office. He was out in Asheville, where he announced 5 executive orders to aid in the recovery of Western North Carolina after Helene, while also revealing intentions not to include the Office of Recovery and Resiliency, NCORE. We've talked about that a lot in recovery, in future recovery efforts and those plans out in the western half of the state. Of those new executive orders, one of them establishes a new office, the Governor's Recovery Office for Western North Carolina, or GROW-NC. It will be headed by the governor, and it is dedicated to coordinating what they're calling a, quote, all-of-state government approach to responding to the emergency. The order also establishes the Division of Community Revitalization within the Department of Commerce, and that is set up to address long-term housing construction and other community needs out west. So yes, it has taken a while. The relief is an ongoing measure, ongoing effort. But again, the announcement this morning, U.S. Senator Thom Tillis securing a little bit over $1.5 billion in a community development block grant for those folks struggling in Western North Carolina. We'll keep an eye on it right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:21, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Continuing our conversation this morning with Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation, tracking our big breaking story this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Mitch, as we learned in the last segment and over the day yesterday, the state Supreme Court is now taking up a case between Jefferson Griffin and Allison Riggs, both of them running for a spot on the North Carolina Supreme Court. But there are about a little over 60,000 votes that are really the precipice of this question that is being asked. Can you go over those 60,000 ballots and what exactly is being challenged here?
Sure. And as a reminder, the reason this crops up is that the final tally in this election had Allison Riggs, the appointed Democratic incumbent, up by 734 votes over Jefferson Griffin, the Republican, who's a state appeals court judge. And what Griffin is saying is that these 60,000 plus votes shouldn't count because they are unlawful. And if you threw them out, his contention is that he might very well end up being the winner of this election. So the largest chunk, more than 60,000 by itself, are people who registered over a number of years to vote in North Carolina who were not required when they registered to provide either the last four digits of their social security number or a driver's license number. That, under federal law, was something that was supposed to take place but didn't. state Republicans and the Republican Party and the National Republican Party had filed a lawsuit before the election challenging these registrations and calling on the State Board of Elections not to count votes of people who were registered in this way. That's the largest chunk of the voters that we're talking about. Now, about 260 voters are also being challenged because they voted in this election even though they have never lived in North Carolina. You might ask yourself, well, why would someone who has never lived in North Carolina even think about voting in our election? Well, these are basically the children of overseas voters who do have some sort of tie to North Carolina that allows them to vote here. There's a state law that has said that children of overseas voters who become of age to vote can vote in a North Carolina election, but that's being challenged by Jefferson Griffin and also being challenged by Republicans in another context, saying that they should not be able to vote in a North Carolina election. And then the third group, which is about 5,500 voters, these are overseas voters who did not provide a photo ID. State law has allowed them to cast a ballot without having to provide their voter ID. But this is something that's being challenged by Jefferson Griffin as part of his overall challenge of more than 60,000 votes. And as I said, his contention is if you throw out all of these votes, he may very well end up being the winner in this election. Critics are saying he's just trying to do this to help him win the election. His supporters are saying, no, it's an election integrity issue. You shouldn't be counting these votes however they're going to go, however it's going to impact the election. And it'll be very interesting to see whether courts will allow this to move forward. As we said, the state Supreme Court has issued a temporary stay and will allow both Griffin and the State Board of Elections to put forward more arguments about why the votes should or shouldn't count and why the election should or shouldn't be certified. And all of that, pending anything else that comes out from the Fourth Circuit, all of that will play out in the next couple of weeks. And by late January, we might finally get some sort of resolution here.
I want to go back to the first part that you mentioned when you're talking about these individuals without driver's license numbers or social security numbers, and all of the arguments made by both Riggs and the other defendants in the case, Mitch. They continued to bring up the point that Griffin and his legal team were attempting to change election law after the election had already happened. But then reading Griffin and his legal team's response and from listening to you, it sounds like some of these rules, or in this case laws, were already on the books. Is this a case of election law being changed after the fact, or were things just not being followed by the State Board of Elections to the degree maybe which they should have?
Well, I think in some respects, the people involved in this are talking past each other. Now, I think Riggs and the people on her side, the State Board of Elections, are correct when they say that the 60,000 plus voters registered based on what they were required to do by the State Board of Elections. The State Board of Elections had a registration form. It didn't require them to give their driver's license number or the last four digits of their social security number. So many of them didn't. They weren't required to do it, so they didn't. It wasn't a case of 60,000 people trying to evade the rules. Now, what Griffin is saying, and what the state Republican Party said in a separate lawsuit before the election even took place, was, hey, this was the State Board of Elections getting things wrong. Federal law required them to, when they registered people to vote, get this information. The fact that they didn't collect this information is the State Board of Elections' fault, and the State Board of Elections should have either gone back and gotten this information from the voters, or taken them off the rolls, or if it was too late to take them off the voter rolls, force them to cast a provisional ballot and then go back and check and make sure that they were eligible to vote. So basically, the Riggs team, the State Board of Elections team, is right in saying that these voters didn't do anything wrong. But what Griffin is saying is, no, the voters didn't do anything wrong. It was the State Board of Elections that did something wrong and that is at fault here and should not have allowed these people to vote without going back and checking to make sure that they really were eligible to register.
So, Mitch, wrapping that up, this conversation up this morning. So as it stands right now, we were expecting potentially the State Board of Elections to certify this election on Friday. That's not going to happen. And obviously continuing to watch and see what happens with the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. Other than that, I guess we're kind of in a holding pattern for the next couple of weeks as various legal challenges fly back and forth within the state's highest court.
That's right. At the state Supreme Court, the only thing that's going to happen, barring anything else from the Fourth Circuit, is that we will await to see some court filings, one of them next week, and then a couple more the following week, and then the state Supreme Court will issue a ruling, one would suspect fairly shortly after getting those briefs. But the other piece to watch is if something else happens from the Fourth Circuit, because the Fourth Circuit could come in based on a request from the State Board of Elections, from Riggs, or from the groups working with Mark Elias to come in and tell the state Supreme Court, hey, you got to stop and get out of this because we're still considering this case and we're a federal court and we trump you.
Yeah, lots of moving parts here. Mitch, we really appreciate the insight this morning. Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:29, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Another look at traffic this morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. Good morning.
It's 5:36. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. Well, today is a big day up in Raleigh as the North Carolina General Assembly will be sworn in ahead of their 2025 long session. And ahead of that, two state senators, Woodson Bradley out of NC 42 and Terrence Everett out of North Carolina District 18, received their official certifications of election from their respective county board of elections, putting to rest weeks of ballot challenges concerning these races. The Democrat victories leave Republicans one seat shy of a supermajority in the House. Democratic Senate leader in Sidney Batch said in a press release yesterday, Terrence Everett and Woodson Bradley represent the best of what our caucus stands for. Dedicated leaders who listen to their communities and work tirelessly to deliver results. Their victories are not just wins for their districts, but for every North Carolinian who believes in in fairness, progress, and the power of democracy. With that, the political makeup is set to be very interesting as we head into this long session. Republicans will have a supermajority in the Senate. They will be one vote shy of the supermajority in the House. However, there are already individuals like Cecil Brockman that have seemingly thrown some cold water on what the Democrats are claiming as victory, holding off the supermajority. He has noted that if Democrats don't stop with their pressure and kind of fear-mongering tactics against him and other Democrats, that he is liable to potentially vote in favor with Republicans. Of course, there's a brand new governor in the governor's mansion in Josh Stein. It will be a very interesting legislative session. And while lawmakers are sworn in today, we are not expecting the session of the General Assembly to start, except for a couple of weeks. They'll begin here at the end of the month as they actually get into the business of the 2025 long session. We'll have a couple of our Carolina Journal reporters down at the General Assembly today and have those latest details on swearing in coming up tomorrow morning right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:38. Taxpayers in Buncombe County, North Carolina, which of course hosts the city of Asheville, had their property tax bills due earlier this week. This is causing some uproar on social media about why the county was not able to go ahead and provide some sort of relief to residents, of course, dealing with the impacts of Hurricane Helene. To get some more details on that this morning, it's my pleasure to welcome the Senior Vice President of Research over at the John Locke Foundation, Brian Balfour, to the Carolina Journal News Hour this morning. Brian, from everything that I've looked into, it looks like this is actually a state law and general statute that does not allow this flexibility.
Right, exactly right. The best that I can see is that the property tax, there are not exceptions made for that, and this is according to state law. Also, the property tax payment deadline is not allowed to be extended either. And again, this is according to North Carolina state law. There's obviously a lot of people panicking. Because they're getting hit with their full property tax bill, even if their property was severely damaged or completely wiped away in the storms and Hurricane Helene. And just kind of doing a little more digging here. Also, state law prohibits a county from prorating property tax bills also. So for 2024 tax bill, this is going to be a complicated situation for a lot of folks to try to figure out. Now, Buncombe County, the Buncombe County Tax Department, they do have some information about folks can try to contact the tax department there in Buncombe County in order to try to work out some payment plans if they're having difficulty paying it. And there's also going to be some relief beginning in 2025. There's discussion on the website where folks can fill out a form if their property is still damaged into the new year as of January 1st. They can submit a report to the tax department there in Buncombe County to the assessment team, and the assessment team apparently is going around the county trying to assess property for 2025 to try to reflect the more realistic value of the properties. So folks may see a decrease in the value that they're assessed for the property in 2025.
So that'll help folks out next year, but for this year, because they went through the majority of 2024 with their property intact, they're on the hook for, as you're understanding it, they're on the hook for that full amount.
Yes, that is my understanding. They're on the hook for the full amount. Of course, there is there's an appeal process that taxpayers can try to go through. And they recommend the first step of just going through the local tax office informally to try to appeal, to see if they can appeal the property assessment for 2024. If that initial contact, if nothing is able to be worked out, then they recommend the taxpayer appealing to the local Board of Equalization and Review, which begins their deliberations the first week of April, it says. So folks would have to wait a little bit for that. So if you want to try to appeal your property value, you can take that to the local Board of Equalization and Review, and it looks like sometime in April they'll be able to have some discussions about that. And then if that doesn't work, if you're not satisfied with that, then there is a state property tax commission that meets in Raleigh monthly that you can take your appeal to. Obviously, folks in Buncombe County, that would present some significant logistical differences if it gets to that state where you have to appeal to the state level. But I'm just kind of presenting, these are the options to the best that I can ascertain them.
Brian, obviously the state of North Carolina is not new to natural disasters. Obviously, the eastern half of the state deals with tropical weather, whether that be tropical storms or hurricanes, more regularly than the western half of the state. There's no exception in general statute for property taxes for individuals that are affected by these storms. Is that something maybe that the General Assembly and the new Stein administration needs to look at in the first couple of weeks of their legislative session?
I think so. I think there's definitely an opportunity to create some flexibility in the state statutes for situations such as these natural disasters where people's homes and property, even business owners, their property has been damaged significantly throughout a decent part of the year. It seems like hitting people when they're down, hitting them with a full property tax bill when their property has been either completely destroyed or significantly damaged. So I think it would be really a great opportunity for the governor and the legislature to take a look at those laws a little more closely, try to allow some flexibility and exemptions for natural disasters such as this.
So there might be people that are physically incapable of paying their property taxes. That date is now come and gone. It was January the 6th. They're going to be assessed penalties. Is there anything retroactively that can be done after the fact to maybe waive or wipe some of those fees out, or are those individuals likely going to have to not only make up their property taxes, but likely pay some penalties depending on how long it takes for them to get those checks in?
Yeah, exactly right. I'm not really seeing any relief specifically to these kind of late fee penalties. The Buncombe County Tax Department does have some information, however, about payment plans. If folks who are struggling to try to pay this tax bill, they offer a phone call for the office where taxpayers can call to try to set up a payment plan or other arrangements to try to pay this over time, maybe a more affordable a timeline for them to try to make the payments. But in terms of it's a little difficult to ascertain what they'll be doing with these late fees, if there's going to be any sort of a relief for that as of yet. I think the best course of action is just calling that local tax department and try to get a better feeling for what they'll be willing to work with you on.
Obviously, the news was kind of made in Buncombe County. There's over 9,000 residential units damaged there, but I can't imagine that Buncombe is alone in dealing with this. Much smaller counties also seeing some of those impacts, and it's probably a similar situation due to general statute for those residents as well.
Yeah. So a lot of these the issues are being brought up because of the state statutes that do not allow for some of this flexibility that we were talking about a moment ago. So again, there's I know Buncombe County, their last countywide property appraisal was in 2021. They were actually scheduled to do the next appraisal in 2025. That has been delayed until 2026. But again, they are offering what they're calling an assessment team for 2025. If your property is still damaged now, contact that local office, and they will hopefully be able to have a look at your property and provide a more realistic assessment of that property value, at least for the 2025 property tax bill.
Unfortunate circumstances, but a great update this morning. We appreciate Brian Balfour, the Senior Vice President of Research over at the John Locke Foundation, joining us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 546, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Another look at traffic on this Wednesday morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. It's looking. Hot.
Good morning again. It's 5:52. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. If you missed any portion of our program this morning, I encourage you to check out the podcast. It's available for free wherever you get your shows. Just search for the Carolina Journal News Hour, tap the subscribe and or follow button, and take the show with you on demand on your own time. It's the Carolina Journal News Hour podcast. Download and subscribe now. As we were talking about earlier this morning, a busy day in Raleigh today as the General Assembly is set to be sworn in for the 2025 long session. However, work is not expected to actually begin today. The House and the Senate will be back later this month, where they will actually begin the work. Obviously, in the long session like we're talking about this year, it's going to be all about the budget. And this, of course, is all going to be relevant, not only because we need a new budget, but you've got brand new powered shifts and dynamics, a new Speaker of the North Carolina House in Destin Hall, a brand new governor in Josh Stein. Republicans continue with their supermajority in the Senate. They will be one vote shy of that in the House. However, some Democrats have indicated that they could be potentially interested in working across the aisle to get some legislation passed. So it is going to be a very interesting first couple of months in the North Carolina General Assembly. We'll have a couple of our reporters down at carolinajournal.com at the GA today, and we'll provide you those updates coming up tomorrow morning. In some other statewide news this morning, recapping our top story, the North Carolina Supreme Court has granted a stay that has blocked the certification of the election between Republican Jefferson Griffin and Democrat Allison Riggs. That information coming out yesterday afternoon. We were originally anticipating that the State Board of Elections would certify Riggs the winner coming up as early as this Friday. However, with the Supreme Court ruling the way in which they did yesterday, that at least is not happening as of right now. With that, the North Carolina State Board of Elections is asking a federal appeals court to order a federal judge in Richard Myers to take back the case involving this dispute over the state Supreme Court election. As I mentioned, the case now squarely sits within the state's highest court, that being the North Carolina Supreme Court. In a court filing on Tuesday at the 4th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in Richmond, Virginia, the North Carolina Elections Board sought a stay that would block U.S. Chief District Judge Richard Myers' Monday decision to remove the case from federal court and return it to the state's top court. Myers' ruling paved the way for the state Supreme Court's 5-1 decision to block certification of election results. Without a court order, the election board had been scheduled to potentially rule on that as early as this Friday, the 10th. So now you've got the State Board of Elections asking for some sort of relief from the another federal court, this being the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals. That is the standard process there. They are asking Richard Myers to take the case back where it originally was. In the meantime, as I mentioned, the state Supreme Court has issued that temporary stay. I know it's confusing. I know there's a lot of moving parts here, but we're kind of in a holding pattern as of right now to see what this 4th Circuit Court is going to do in the next couple of days. And then if nothing happens there over the next couple of weeks, we'll watch back and forth legal briefings from both parties, both Griffin, the State Board of Elections, Riggs, and some of the Democrat defendants in that case. We'll keep a close eye on it right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. With that, some hurricane relief coming, courtesy of United States Senator Thom Tillis. He announced yesterday $1.65 billion in a community development block grant for disaster recovery. Those funds have been secured to help rebuild communities that were devastated by Hurricane Helene. According to Tillis, the funding comes directly from a bipartisan $100 billion supplemental disaster bill that was passed back on December the 21st, which he also worked with his congressional colleagues to pass. Tillis also secured several key provisions in this legislation, including mandates to deliver federal assistance to Western North Carolina. In a press release yesterday, Tillis, of course, announcing the $1.65 billion, but also calling on the new Democrat governor of the state, and Josh Stein, alongside the North Carolina General Assembly, to work to replace the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency, NCORE. We've talked about that group. They were responsible for hurricane relief in the eastern half of the state, and even as of right now, billions of dollars unaccounted for, work stoppages, properties in half states of construction. It's been a real mess. So that is a story that we are continuing to track. You can read more details on that announcement over on our website. It's our top story at carolinajournal.com. That's going to do it for a Wednesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We're back tomorrow morning, 5 to 6, right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.